welcome to episode 6 of Around the World in 2020. If this is your first time watching, I'm Ani Baker. I was a public school teacher for 12 years and now I'm a documentary filmmaker. And I started this interview series from quarantine this year, partially because I'm curious about the world, and also partially because I got pretty tired pretty quickly of everyone acting like America is the center of the universe. We're not, and I really want to know what 2020 has been like elsewhere, because everyone is experiencing all of this. So today, I'm bringing you along with me to New Zealand, which is a country with universal health care, logical gun laws, and Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern, who has led her people with facts and empathy during this pandemic, including a quarantine game she made up for New Zealand children that she announced during a COVID briefing where she said if they looked closely they might find teddy bears hidden throughout their morning walk, just offering a game that families could play because they've been so cooped up. And the best part is, in my opinion, her husband stays home and takes care of their newborn while she runs the country. We love to see it. Today, we'll talk to Denesa Chan about what this year has been like in New Zealand, and for Denesa personally, a woman of mixed race who is feeling more empowered than ever to claim her full identity in more spaces. Here is Around the World in 2020, Ashburton, New Zealand.
Then all of a sudden it was like, holy crap, the borders are closing. He has to change his flight to the next morning, otherwise he's not going to get out in time. It felt really sudden. I remember
like when you got onto the boat, the world was one way, and then when you got off, the world was another. That is wild.
It was crazy.
To hear you say like, yeah, most people I talked to said that it was lovely is interesting, because I mean, I'm sure you've seen like the energy in the air here is despair, chaos, fear, sickness. I wonder if it had anything to do with how COVID was talked about to New Zealand citizens by your Prime Minister, who I want to talk about because you have a female Prime Minister. Tell me what it's like.
She's so great. I mean, especially if you have a lot of empathy and you watch what's going on and you see how other leaders respond, like your guts, or I mean mine, I'll just say for myself, it's like I'm just like heartbroken hearing how some other leaders are talking to people and just kind of glazing over the fact that people need to feel heard and they need to feel validated. You know, there's this whole other part. It's not just what policies you put into place, but it's also how you handle people and how you kind of hold them with your words. And our Prime Minister has done such a beautiful job with that. Really, really inspiring. During lockdown, she gave a briefing every single day. She always was really calm. She was clear about what we do know, about what we don't know, and she was really good about setting expectations. So, for example, she would say, okay, look, we're going to be in lockdown for 4 weeks at least, and how it goes really depends on everybody in New Zealand. So if we all stick to it, then we have a chance of just knocking this out of the park and it not having a relapse. But it's really up to us. If we don't stay in our bubble, then it will continue and businesses will have to be closed longer. And from number one, she was like, the economy will take a hit because we don't have tourism and because all of these other businesses are shutting. We are going to take a loss economically. And how big of a loss really depends on how we all act. And our number one goal is to save lives. And if we act responsibly, we can potentially save tens of thousands of lives. And for the most part, the culture here in New Zealand is pretty grounded, pretty kind-hearted. Like the whole common decency is actually common here, which is a beautiful thing. And so I think it wasn't hard for most New Zealanders to go, oh yeah, I get it. Duh, let's do this. Hi, is this better?
So good. It's so clear. Yes. Wonderful.
Oh, great. Okay, good. Yeah. There was a truck parked in between. Whoops, I'm sorry.
Here's your Wi-Fi.
Yeah, it's really not great Wi-Fi. That's the only big disadvantage to being in New Zealand. Okay, let me go back.
So being on an island just makes it so that the Wi-Fi is weaker. That's interesting.
Yeah, because actually our Wi-Fi, our internet comes from a cable that goes from Australia through the ocean to here at this point.
That
But,
truly sounds like a cartoon explanation for how internet gets in New Zealand. Like, it's like, listen up, kids, the cable runs. I don't know shit. That was made up. That's so funny. You said that she gave briefings every day. I'm curious, did she ever take questions from journalists during those briefings? And what was the energy in those rooms?
Yeah, she took questions after every single briefing. So there's a segment of the population that gets most of their protein in winter from hunting. There's no surfing allowed, no hunting allowed.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Because the idea was, and I thought this was so beautiful and so smart, they didn't want people to engage in high risk activities because if somebody had an accident, they would need to go to the emergency room. So they would be taking up healthcare facilities or healthcare time, or, you know. And those briefings, yeah, they were really good. And they would pretty much always end with something like, it's up to us, you know, we can break the chain, stay in our bubbles. And she really, really, really emphasized staying kind and being kind. That was really always there. She did a thing. She talked to the kids at one point, and she told all the kids to, you know, that they're being really good and, you know, staying indoors and not going to school. And she said, you know, when you go on your walks, you keep your eyes out because you might see teddy bears around and people might be putting them through the neighborhoods and things. So, and then she did a thing for Easter. She was saying, yeah, the Easter bunny is also in lockdown, so the Easter bunny might not be able to come to your house this year, but don't worry, like the Easter bunny, you know, is still thinking about you, because she knew a lot of the families might not have extra money to be able to do a big, you know, thing for Easter. So it was so conscious, so aware, so empathetic and caring. It was just really beautiful. Yeah, so what happened was the adults all heard that and were like, okay. And so people started putting teddy bears in their windows or putting them up a tree with a little note, or they did like scenes like of teddy bears having picnics, or, you know, different things. And you would walk down the street, even as an adult, it was pretty cool, and just kind of spot all the little teddy bears.
Yeah. Does she have children?
I think she was pregnant while she was running for office, and then she gave birth, and her husband takes care of the child and worked just a stay-at-home parent. Yeah.
Okay, I'm coming to New Zealand. This is a storybook. This is like if I could design a country. That's checking all the boxes so far. So because she was elected in 2017, right? So that kiddo is very young. I love it. So I'm curious about, now when you go out, masks or?
No masks, no nothing, no.
Because the numbers
Everything's
are low enough. I mean, you guys are down to where there's a headline for one new case. So you guys you've got it under control.
Basically, there's no cases in the community. So when people come back to New Zealand, and the only people who are allowed in the country now are people who are citizens of New Zealand, or there's like compassionate cases where if your family member or loved one is sick and they're here, you know, you can come, but you have to be quarantined for 14 days.
So tell me about that. What happens when somebody in New Zealand tests positive? What is the trajectory?
So right now there's 0 people in the community in New Zealand who are testing positive. Basically, since we know nobody inside the country has it anymore. So if you're coming into the country, you're tested, I think it's about 3 times over the course of your 14-day quarantine. If you're found positive, then you would get treatment, or, you know, you would get help.
Ideally, we would look to you, you know, as an example of a country that's got it under wraps. So you said that they're put up in a hotel. Tell me a little bit about that.
There's just new rules now that came out yesterday, because now usually New Zealanders travel quite a bit on the whole, you know. Now they're saying if you voluntarily leave New Zealand and want to come back, then you have to pay for your own quarantine, which I think is reasonable. Somehow food would be brought to you. There have been a couple people who've broken out of quarantine, which was, it's so sad. But like somebody went to the grocery store, and then that whole grocery store, and then everybody in that grocery store had to be tested. And we have an app, which is great. So we're still using the app. Okay, so
what is the app?
You're like, what is the app?
I'm fascinated.
Okay, so we have this app where businesses have the option of printing out their own personal QR code. And so when we go out, if we go to the grocery store or whatever, we just like sign in via the app, And then the app takes care of knowing who was at what place at what time, so that if somebody is tested positive, like let's say I went to that grocery store that person went to, then I would be informed. Somebody would call me and make sure that they got a hold of me and know that like I need to be tested, or at that point I would probably like just self-quarantine just in case. And like, for example, that one where the person broke out of quarantine and went to the grocery store, they shut down the whole grocery store. Everything was thoroughly cleaned. All the employees were like sent home, got tested, and it wasn't reopened until they were sure everything was safe. But it was a really big deal. That was the headline. One person went to one grocery store.
So was the name of that person released?
No.
Okay, good.
No.
I was wondering about that because I thought, well, first of all, I'm curious about that person's story. Like, what was it that you did at the grocery store? Did they set up a secret mission to try to get away with it? How were they like, I just want to know about that person's day.
As far as the person who just kind of busted out, these days you have to sign in and sign out. Everyone who is in that same hotel that you're in has to kind of sign in and sign out. So in theory, you shouldn't really be able, like, they should be like, okay, you're on this list. No, you can't sign out. So maybe they kind of snuck out. I don't know how they did it, but
I think there's a story there. And also, like, you won't believe that they snuck out for some dire reason. Like, they really needed something that was at the grocery store. But then also, like, what if they were just like, I need hot Cheetos or whatever,
Well, yeah. So the rumor is that they were buying alcohol and cigarettes. Yeah.
Okay. Did you guys have any bans on alcohol and cigarettes? I've heard of that in some places.
We didn't have any bans, but liquor stores wanted to stay open during level 4 and they weren't allowed to stay open because they were like, that's not essential. Come on.
Yeah. And some people were like, I beg to differ. It's more essential now than ever.
Like our version of Target wanted to stay open. We're not allowed to be open.
What is your version of Target?
It's called The Warehouse. And I just have to brag about them for a little bit because like they're on a mission to go carbon neutral entirely.
What the heck?
Yeah, and they're already like taking steps. Yeah, it's so awesome. It's really interesting because there's not just two main parties here, so the whole parliamentary system is really different. So they have elections, and we're about to have elections in September coming.
Yeah, because it's every 3 years there, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, interesting. Okay.
Yeah. But what's really interesting and cool is that, so there are several different parties. There's two main ones, and then there's like a lot of different other ones as well. But after elections, which happen for longer than just one day, which I found really cool. It's not like if you don't make it on that day, you can't vote.
Sorry, I know. How many days does it go on for?
It seemed like it was about a week. Like a work week.
Okay. Everything's so logical. Yeah. I'm wow, okay.
Yeah. And you could go into any voting facility anywhere in the country. You don't have to like go to your specific county or whatever. Yeah. Which makes sense. Yeah. But also like the population here is much smaller, so it's I think more doable logistically.
Right. Fair.
But yeah, so then after that, after all the votes are in, and you vote for the party, you don't vote for the person. So the party, like up until elections happen, party can change who they're putting up as the front runner. So like, for example, there was a big thing because the two main parties here are Labour and National, which is kind of like the difference between Democrats and progressives. So we don't really have like the whole right-wing thing. It's like liberal or more liberal.
Yeah, literally booking a ticket after this call. I can't believe it. Okay, go ahead.
Yeah. Okay. So for example, National, the person that was their front-running person stepped down, and then their second in choice stepped down, and then they just elected this other woman to be the front runner. So that means if National gets into office, a woman will be Prime Minister. Well, Jacinda Ardern is the leader of Labour. So basically it's a woman versus a woman right now, which is pretty cool. So the way the Labour Party is in power right now is after elections end, then let's say National got, more of the votes than Labour did. What Labour can do, and what happened last election, is that Labour went to the Green Party and went to this other party called New Zealand First, and they formed a coalition together and added up all of their votes. And it turned out if they formed a coalition, they had more votes than National. So that's how they got into office.
I can't imagine having a populace, right? Like be okay with, whoever it is, as long as they're part of the part. I mean, I guess I feel that way right now because we're so upset that Joe Biden is our choice. But we also were like really not that stoked about most of the other candidates either. I mean, I was a Bernie person, also would have voted for Elizabeth Warren, but like we've got a lot of animosity for a lot of the Democratic candidates. So do you see that happens where you are as well?
I'd say the main difference is that the candidates in the US tend to be more individualistic. And if there isn't a huge difference in their beliefs or in their policies, they'll tend to create differences so that they can stand out, which is an effective strategy within the US system. In this case, it tends to be more collaboratively oriented, I'd say.
Got it.
And you do know who you're voting for up until they can only change up until a certain point, and then okay, if I'm voting for national,
that's a good point. Okay, having a woman in charge, what is healthcare like there, and then what is it like for you as a woman specifically?
If you have an accident, and I've had an accident here, I was a passenger in a head-on car crash, and
I'm so sorry.
Everyone ended up okay in the end, but it was real serious. Like ambulances from like 2 different areas came. I went to the emergency room, like thoroughly x-rayed, thoroughly examined. Like even there was this lady that came around and was like, she was offering like everybody tea and sandwiches and things, like on like real porcelain, like not these like plastic throwaway things. It was like real things.
In the hospital?
In the hospital. Was so comforting. I can't tell you how comforting that was. Yeah. Like her only job was to make people feel comforted. That was it. So I paid $0 for that. All that.
Amazing. Okay.
Anyone in the country who has an accident is covered. It doesn't matter what your visa status is.
Or if it was your fault or anything like that. Wow.
No, there's no investigation. If you had an accident, you get covered.
You need help, you're given help.
Yeah, and I think that really has a lot of influence on the psyche of people here, because there's a sense of like calm and ease that's really beautiful, and I wonder if knowing you're cared for is part of that calm and ease, or if it's just a cultural thing.
It's gotta be, right? I mean, I feel like everything that you're saying about New Zealand has hugely impacted this pandemic and how you guys have handled it. It sounds like logically, compassionately, effectively. Sounds like she always had a doctor, a scientist next to her who she was listening to and supporting the information from. And also just the awareness that you're going to level 4 lockdown because there are 20 cases. You're taking it really seriously. Things are shutting down. And also, if you get sick, the government's going to put you up. They're going to bring you food. They're going to make sure everyone you came into contact with also quarantines. And if you need to go to the hospital, you're not going to be in debt for the rest of your life, for wanting to continue to live. Like, I can only imagine that. I mean, just the quality of life there. Yeah. I would imagine that it's much higher.
It feels higher to me. People stressing out is really a novelty here.
How did the Black Lives Matter movement here and the protests and the riots that initially broke out, which I felt were very necessary and actually appropriate for what was the magnitude of what was going on, what was the view of what was going on in America from New Zealand's perspective? And did the Black Lives Matter movement start a conversation about racism where you are?
It did, to some extent, though not as much as I personally would have liked. Mm-hmm. People cannot understand police behaving the way that they do in the US. Either people are like, come on, US, get your act together. I remember being a little girl and learning about the civil rights movement and thinking, if I were alive during that time, I would have been so active. And we are alive during those times now. How it's affected me personally, also on a different level, is I am of mixed race heritage. I'm half Chinese, and the other half is almost entirely Swedish. And I haven't really, or hadn't until recently, I hadn't really connected with other, like with literature from the mixed race community or with other people. I always just kind of felt really isolated, knowing that I present a certain way. And most people who are of European heritage tend to assume I'm of European heritage, deny my own truth in order to make them feel more comfortable, which would provide safety for me. So I would just not talk about it. unless somebody asked me, which was very, very rare. But as an adult, instead of being on the receiving end of hatred or racist comments or racist acts, I'm in a different position, which is sometimes being around a group of like white people who think it's safe
To be
make
racist
comments
Wow.
about other people in the BIPOC community, or about like against Chinese people specifically. And so I can't say that this is like, the perfect place with no room for growth.
Yeah. So then I'm curious, prior to the Black Lives Matter movement, if you're in a group with all white friends, they don't know that you're part Chinese, they make a racist joke, you used to sort of let that go, and since Black Lives Matter, you felt emboldened to call it out?
Before, I might kind of call it out, but in a more subtle way to protect them because of white fragility. I wouldn't want to hurt their feelings. But now I can have conversations in a different way with people. And I feel more comfortable saying, no, actually, I'm half Chinese. And I love it. It's great. And let me tell you how, like, my family's history is crazy and amazing and rich. Yeah, so I think I'm more willing to show up and be visible, and also to connect with other people. Even something as simple as joining a private Facebook group with mixed race people, and we can talk about kind of the issues that we've had. And I found it really comforting that other people have had similar experiences of feeling like, well, I don't fit in over here because I'm not really this, and I don't fit in over there because I'm not really that. Or even some people are like, I feel like I'm all of it. I am all of it. Why should I have to kind of divide myself up?
I've seen some of the language change around being mixed race lately in a way that just feels very empowering, and I love to see it catch on, where people are less often saying I'm half this, I'm half that, but like, I am white and Chinese, or I am Latina and Black. Like, I'm just both of those things. There's no problem with police brutality then in New Zealand? I'll take that as the answer. Perfect. That is the perfect answer. I love that. Okay.
The police here, like, the joke with the police here. So they used to have a show that was kind of like Cops, like the American Cops. I don't know. Plus, like, the cops here don't really have guns. And I think they can kind of get a gun. Like, they can kind of go, if it's a special situation, I think they can maybe like...
On a special occasion, you can have a gun as a treat.
If it's like, if there's something, like when the horrible shootings in Christchurch happened, the attacker had 3 mosques on his list. And the mosque in my community was the 3rd on that list.
Oh my God. Wow. That's...
So we were really close to that. Seeing how the people responded to that, seeing how the police responded to that, and seeing how the Prime Minister responded to that, we're all really kind of the only saving grace from that horrible, horrible shooting. Within 24 hours of that, our Prime Minister said, look, there's no need for these types of automatic assault weapons in our country. And so I'm going to create some legislature, and we're going to ban those. And I love the public radio here, kind of our version of NPR. They'd have people call up or text in or whatever, and they'd ask, are you a gun owner? If you are, I'd love to interview you. Do you have these types of weapons? Do you have a feeling about it? I want to hear from you. And so the vast majority of people were saying either I don't have those weapons and there's no need for those weapons, or they would call up and say, I'm a hunter and I wouldn't want to use that, because if an incident like this can happen because I'm allowed to have this type of weapon, then I don't want to be allowed to have this type of weapon. But there are kind of gun clubs here, and just the kind of local ones, and the gun clubs were coming out and saying, no, we don't want these types of weapons. So if there are any weapons here, the legislation that actually ended up passing was a huge gun buyback. So any gun that either was that type of automatic assault weapon or that could be manipulated to become that kind of weapon, the government would pay you if you returned it.
Brilliant.
Brilliant. Yeah. So a lot of people just turned them in, and that was that.
Wow.
But also gun safety is a big thing. My partner hunts, and so he has some weapons. And there was, when he had to renew his license, well, first of all, you have to be licensed.
Mm-hmm.
And when you renew your license, somebody physically comes and checks on you and interviews you and interviews your partner or somebody close to you And so they interviewed me about my partner's mental health state, about whether or not he'd ever been abusive, about just a whole checklist of things. If I had said, yes to any of those, he would never, be able to have them. So
the level of logic in the way that things are handled there is just, every time I'm doing this, it's just my genuine, I don't know, it's so hard to process.
And it's interesting also, one of the reasons that was cited for wanting to do this as quickly as they did do this was because specifically they didn't want the NRA to come.
I'm worried that we're all in America, we're going to get addicted to chaos and trauma during this time. And I just wonder when things do level out, let's say next year, how much we're going to start to create chaos in our own lives. Because it's true, the level of batshit insanity and horror that we see 4 times a day from all over America is never in my life have I had to process this. It's just and it's all psychotically unbelievable, And I just worry about obviously everybody's physical health, but everyone's mental health after this year. Jeez.
I worry about that too. Past 3 years, basically since Trump took office, it's been really traumatizing.
Yeah.
I feel like the whole population is, and even those of us who aren't physically in the U.S., the whole thing about Trump exploring what would happen if he didn't step down. It's not what the fuck? That's a whole nother level of what the fuck.
Well, and he's also defunding USPS, so mail-in voting is getting super fucked with. He's talking about changing the election date. Also, because of COVID, all of the people that would typically vote against Trump, he's making it almost impossible for them to cast their votes. And then I saw him directly asked that question in an interview a week ago, which I also, for the most part, I have him blocked on Twitter. I try to just not engage, but every once in a while I'll hear that he has said so, and I just sort of have to see it go down with my own 2 eyes. So I saw him asked that question, is there a possibility that you would consider not accepting the results of the election? And he was yeah, we'll have to see. He basically said if I don't want to, I won't. And it's just woof. We are so much deeper into a totalitarian, authoritative, evil dictatorship than I think anybody wants to admit. And it's been, like you said, it's been happening, and it's been so glaringly scary and obvious with the kids in cages at the border. Let's just start there. And watching Trump supporters be no, they shouldn't be trying to get into our country, and just justifying these huge scale horrors one by one. And now it's just the water is boiling and everyone's gonna drown. It's been truly an honor to hear about what it's like in New Zealand through your eyes. So thank you so much for being a part of this.
Thank you. I've had such a wonderful time talking to you. And it's really, really wonderful to feel a sense of connection across a screen and across hemispheres. And for somebody that I've never had the opportunity to speak with, it's just amazing. And I'm so beautiful, and I'm really, really grateful.
Hearing about how everyone is handling this has helped me handle it so much better. Even though we're so separate and our situation looks so different wherever we are, we're all human, and there are so many themes that just come up in every single conversation just about, what it's like to be a person during this time. And that's been really, really cool. The similarities in everyone's experiences, despite how different the details can be. What have you learned about yourself, about your life, about the world in 2020?
Even here in New Zealand, people are being selfish assholes. That really hit me hard. Had that happened in Los Angeles, I would go, ugh, LA people. There's something really kind of powerful about having it happen here in a place that feels really safe. If people here are taking it to that level, then have I misunderstood humanity in a really fundamental way? I think the conclusion that I've come to is when people are stressed, you're seeing them at their worst. When people are stressed, you're seeing them triggered. When people are triggered, they're going back to really fundamental, basic levels of their personality. I'm trying to not judge humanity on the worst of the worst while they're just reacting and not able to really respond.
Thank you so much for being a part of this, and your voice has really rounded out the conversation, and I'm honored to have talked to you today. Thank you for giving me your time.
Thank you so much. I'm so grateful. It was such a delight. Even the parts that were not delightful, because we're talking about really hard stuff. even the fact that we can connect about it has just been, it's been like a soothing balm. So I really appreciate it.